Welcome back to the Unchurching, where we challenge the narratives and reclaim the truth about spirituality. Today we're tackling one of the most fear-inducing and controversial teachings in Christianity, hell. For centuries, the Church has preached about eternal torture, a fiery underworld where sinners burn forever. But what if I told you that this idea of hell isn't even in the Bible? What if hell was never meant to be a place of endless punishment, but a misunderstood metaphor and mistranslation used to control people? Let's dive in and uncover the truth about hell once and for all. First, let's be clear. The modern idea of hell, a place of eternal conscious torment, is not in the original Hebrew scriptures or early Christian teachings. In the Old Testament, the concept of an afterlife was vague. The Hebrew word Sheol simply meant the grave or the place of the dead, a shadowy, unconscious existence where all souls went, good or bad. There was no fire, no torture, no demons poking you with pitchforks. The fiery hell imagery came later, influenced by pagan myths and expanded in medieval imagination to control the masses through fear. When the Old Testament was translated into Greek, the Septuagint, Sheol was rendered as Hades. But Hades wasn't originally a torture chamber either. In Greek mythology, it was simply the underworld, the realm of the dead. It wasn't until much later that Hades was painted as a fiery place of punishment. So, if you see hell in your English Bible, it's usually a mistranslation of Sheol or Hades, both meaning the grave or the unseen realm of the dead, not an eternal torture pit. Now let's talk about Gehenna. Jesus mentions Gehenna multiple times. But what was Gehenna? Gehenna was a real physical place outside Jerusalem called the Valley of Hinnom. It was essentially an ancient garbage dump where trash and even dead bodies were burned. When Jesus warned about Gehenna, he was using it as a vivid metaphor for judgment and destruction, not describing a cosmic torture chamber for souls after death. He was speaking to first-century Jews in symbolic language they understood, warning them about the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the consequences of their actions in this life. The idea that Gehenna equals eternal fiery hell is a later invention, not what Jesus was actually talking about. There's also Tartarus, mentioned once in 2 Peter 2:4. This isn't even for humans. It refers to a deep abyss in Greek mythology where rebellious angels, or watchers, are kept. It's not described as a place where human souls are eternally punished. Again, this is symbolic language borrowed from mythology, not a doctrine of endless suffering for ordinary people. Here's something most people don't know. In the first few centuries after Jesus, many early Christian theologians believed in universal reconciliation, the idea that all souls would eventually be restored to God. Church fathers like Origen and Gregory of Nyssa taught that God's love was ultimately irresistible, and that punishment was corrective, not eternal. It wasn't until the 5th and 6th centuries, when the Roman Empire and church authorities wanted to tighten their control, that the doctrine of eternal hell became widespread and enforced. Why did they push the eternal hell narrative so hard? Because fear is the most powerful way to control people. If you can make them terrified of eternal suffering, they will obey, conform, and never question authority. The idea of an eternal hell has been weaponized to manipulate people into religious submission, keep them in guilt and shame, and make them feel dependent on a system rather than empowering them to connect directly with the divine. So what's the truth? Hell as eternal torture is not biblical, it's a tragic distortion. The original texts talk about the grave, symbolic purification, and divine justice that ultimately restores. You were never meant to live in fear of flames, but to awaken to love, transformation, and union with the divine. Alright, now that we've dismantled the literal fear-based version of hell, let's explore what hell actually symbolizes from an esoteric and mystical perspective. In esoteric traditions, whether in Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Eastern mysticism, or even early Christian mystics, hell isn't a place you go after you die. Hell is a state of consciousness. It's the inner condition of separation, fear, guilt, and spiritual blindness. When you are trapped in lower frequencies, ruled by ego, anger, greed, hatred, and shame, you are already living in hell. It is a psychic and spiritual state rather than a fiery geographical location. Hell is seen as a kind of inner purification fire. Mystics talk about the refiner's fire, an alchemical symbol for the burning away of false identities and ego attachments. In this view, the so-called fire is a metaphor for the painful but necessary process of transformation. It's the dark night of the soul, the inner abyss you face when you confront your shadow, all the parts of you that you've rejected or denied. This is where true healing happens. Instead of being punishment, it's actually grace disguised as fire. It burns away what isn't real, revealing your divine essence beneath. Esoteric teachers often speak of dying before you die. This means dying to your lower self, your illusions, and the false identity you've built up, so that you can be reborn into your higher self. The hell experience is this symbolic death. It feels like agony because the ego fights for survival. But beyond it is rebirth, liberation, and union with divine consciousness. So rather than a threat of punishment, it's an invitation to transformation. In the mystical understanding, no one is thrown into hell by an angry God. Each soul chooses consciously or unconsciously to stay in separation or to move toward unity and love. Hell is the self-imposed state of refusing love and truth. It is the result of turning away from your own divine light. When you finally choose to turn inward, face your shadows, and reclaim your divine spark, you move out of hell and into what mystics call heaven, which is simply unity and alignment with Source. Many spiritual traditions have a myth of descent, like Jesus going into hell, the underworld, for 3 days before resurrection, or Inanna's descent into the underworld in Sumerian mythology. These stories aren't about literal journeys into a fiery pit. They symbolize the soul's necessary descent into its own depths, the subconscious, the wounds, the rejected parts, before it can ascend. This journey is how we integrate the light and the dark, heal karmic patterns, and step into wholeness. So when we talk about going to hell from an esoteric view, we're talking about the spiritual work we must do within ourselves. Alchemy teaches us that lead must be transformed into gold. In the same way, your hell is the lead, the heavy, unprocessed pain and ignorance. The fire is the catalyst. It forces a transformation that reveals your true nature, the spiritual gold, the divine self. From this perspective, hell is actually a sacred stage of the soul's evolution, not a final destination. It is a spiritual initiation, a passage into higher consciousness, and ultimately, freedom. When you understand this, hell loses all its fear-based power. You realize that no external authority holds the keys to your salvation. You hold them within. Your shadows, your pain, your mistakes. They are all part of your curriculum for awakening. The true salvation is self-realization, recognizing your oneness with divine source and embodying love in every part of your life. So if you feel like you're in hell right now, whether it's depression, anxiety, addiction, heartbreak, know this: you are not being punished. You are in the fire of transformation. You are burning away everything that isn't truly you. This is not the end. It's the beginning of your rebirth. You are not alone. You are not damned. You are being refined, reborn, and called into your true divine self. Drop a comment if you've been through your own hell and come out stronger. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that hell isn't the end. It's just a sacred passage. Remember, you were never meant to live in fear. You were meant to rise in love. See you next time on the Unchurch.